Our second speaker is Magda Remisiewicz, who is speaking to us from Poland tonight. She attended the University of Gdansk in Poland and completed her PhD on the migration of European robins using ring recovery data. She has also completed a 3-year postdoc at the University of Cape Town. And Magda has a keen interest in waders, and when she returned to Poland, she took up a lecture position at the University of Gdansk and is now the head of the Bird Migration Research Station there. And last week, Magda spoke about Operation Baltic, which is a bird monitoring project that has been running since the early 1960s on the Baltic coast of Poland. And just as a reminder, if you missed that talk last week, it is available to watch on the BDI YouTube channel. Tonight, Magda is going to give us the second part of her talk on bird migration. So thank you, Magda, and over to you.
Okay, thank you, Karis, for that nice introduction. So basically today, part 2 of the selection of some results from the 60 years of studies conducted by the Operation Baltic, which is the long-term research and monitoring program in Poland, which is focused on bird migrations. So for those of you who haven't seen my talk last week, then brief reminder or a brief introduction to the Operation Baltic. It basically includes the network of 3 coastal stations, which are on the crossroads of the migrants migrating between the non-breeding grounds in Africa and then breeding grounds in Scandinavia. And the coastline ensures that we've got numerous stream of migrants during each spring and autumn season. So now we are in the 60th anniversary year of the Operation Baltic, and this is a great opportunity to show you some examples of the results that this project has generated over the 60 years. So my today's stories will be mostly about the long distance migrants, such as garden warbler and spotted flycatcher that migrate between the non-breeding grounds in sub-Saharan Africa and the breeding grounds in Scandinavia, and on the way they pass through our Baltic coast in Poland. And this is how Operation Baltic looks almost today, like a few days before Easter. I went there for 3 days. And this is the setup of Bukovo ringing station, the more western one. It's actually located at the narrow spit between the coastal lake Bukovo that you see here in the background of that riparian forest. And then there is a narrow belt of dunes. And then if you face the other direction towards the northwest, especially at those nice sunsets, then you will see the coast of Baltic. And if you were following that setting sun for about 350 kilometers, then you will land at the coast of Sweden. So this is the perfect place for the migrants migrating towards the northern breeding grounds in Scandinavia to cross through the Baltic. It's one of the shortest distances across the Baltic. And then we set up to catch that stream of bird migrants using mist nets. So the standard number of mist nets, it's about 50 of 8 meters passerine mist nets, and that's the monitoring set that we repeat every year in more or less the same locations. And we top it up with additional mist nets set up for certain species, like sometimes for migrating owls, sometimes for migrating raptors, but then we note the catch from those mist nets separately, so we can always tell the monitoring catches from non-monitoring results. And those birds that we catch with those mist nets, we ring, and this is our main method, which we supplement with newer, more modern methods of studying bird migrations. And this is a few photos from my pre-Easter trip. So it's still relatively early spring, and we are mostly having now short and medium distance migrants that are migrating within Europe. And so we had a couple of blackbirds in our mist nets, which were local birds as confirmed by the local rings, but a part of them will still be on migration towards Scandinavia. Then were quite good numbers of goldcrests and firecrests, which are the tiniest birds in Poland. They weighed only about 5 grams. But altogether, over the 6 years of Operation Baltic, we've ringed more than 5 tons of gold crests. So you can only imagine the numbers. And then other more common migrants are robins or chaffinches, still the early batch of migrants that will still be heading to the north. And now the heroes of tonight, the long distance migrants, which I expect a little bit later, around mid-April at our stations. And one of those is garden warbler, the long distance migrant between Scandinavia and then sub-Saharan non-breeding grounds. And having 60 years of data in hand, we could analyze the long-term trends in their numbers. And unfortunately, those long-term trends indicate that the garden warblers have not quite benefited from the environmental changes over the years. So mostly the numbers of garden warblers have decreased between the 1960s and 1990s. But what gives some hope is those fluctuations here in the last few decades and slightly stable or even increasing trend here. Basically, this might reflect the numbers of breeding garden warblers in Fennoscandia and in Poland that have slightly increased over the recent years. So we hope that the slightly increasing trends will stabilize or will show some increase of the numbers. So knowing that about our garden warbler and also having some indications of the migrations from the ringing recoveries, which are here marked in black, together with my current PhD student and then the master student, Agata Pinczka, we set out to identify whether there are any long-term changes in the timing of migration of immature garden warblers in autumn through our coastal stations. And could those changes be linked in any way to the temperatures, either on the breeding grounds or maybe on non-breeding grounds and migration routes of garden warblers? So as you see, garden warbler is quite common breeding bird across Europe. And then its non-breeding grounds include most of sub-Saharan Africa, as far as South Africa, where I had pleasure to observe and ring garden warblers, although in small numbers. And I would like to believe that those garden warblers migrate for the breeding somewhere to Poland or through Poland to Scandinavia. Because they are so long-distance migrants, they've got rather short time for breeding, so the breeding is confined to only 2 months, within which they manage to lay only 1 brood per year, because they've got quite long spring and autumn migration, which then cuts the daytime for breeding rather short, which will be important for the further part of that of the garden warbler story. So we analyzed the long-term trends in the timing of garden warbler migrations in autumn through our Baltic stations, but we also tried to link the temperatures in Scandinavian breeding grounds, analyzing a range of temperatures from many weather stations in Scandinavia. And also we tried to correlate temperatures on spring migration routes of garden warblers against the migration timing at our stations. And the first result was that over more than 50 years of our data, the garden warblers, immature garden warblers in autumn, didn't advance the beginning of their migration as we partly expected, but the last 25% of migrating young garden warblers have advanced the end of their passage through our western station, Bukovo, and over almost 6 years, this advance was almost up to 2 weeks. And this wasn't an accident, because a similar result came out from the data from our second station, Mierzeja Wiślana, located more to the east, where also the last cohorts of immature garden warblers advanced, shifted their migration earlier by up to 11 days. So we set out to investigate what conditions, what environmental factors could lie behind that advance. And so we checked the temperatures across Scandinavia, and it appeared that the temperatures in southern Skane at the weather station Kalmar, the summer temperatures in Skane were related to the timing and to that advance of the end of migration of garden warblers at Bukovo. So basically the higher was the summer temperatures at the breeding grounds in July during the breeding season, the earlier was the end of those immatures autumn migration through Bukovo. But then we also checked what could happen earlier in the garden warbler life cycle, like would there be any effect of temperatures that they encounter in spring on their migration to the north, on what's happening later on. And to our surprise, it actually turned out that spring temperatures in Italy, the weather station Brindisi, were related with the autumn migration timing of young garden warblers. So basically, the higher were spring temperatures in Italy along the adult garden warblers' spring migration route, the earlier was the end of the offspring autumn migration at Bukovo. So this wasn't even a direct effect of those temperatures in Italy on the immatures because they had not existed at that point. Maybe they were only planned by those migrating adults, but this only could be the carryover effect of the temperatures on migrating adults that was somehow then transferred to the timing of the offsprings. Then encouraged by those interesting results on garden warbler, with another student, Kasia Niedziela, last year, we focused more on spotted flycatchers and we've done analogous analysis. So firstly, considering the numbers of spotted flycatchers, over the decades, the numbers have also increased, especially between the 1960s and 80s. But after that, their trend is rather stable. So this gives some hope. And in Sweden and most of Poland, breeding populations of spotted flycatchers have slightly decreased, but fortunately more to the east and northeast in eastern Poland and in Finland, the breeding numbers of spotted flycatchers have increased. So this might be responsible for that stable or slightly increasing trend, which we hope will continue in the future. And then considering the migrations and also the timing of autumn migrations of young spotted flycatchers, we've done analogous analysis trying to find the weather and climate conditions that would affect the immatures migration timing. And again, spotted flycatcher is common across most Europe and then migrates to sub-Saharan Africa for the non-breeding season. And the furthest results, the farthest ringing recoveries of spotted flycatchers ringed at the Operation Baltic come from Congo, DRC. So now, thing we analyzed was if there was any shift to any earlier or later arrivals of spotted flycatchers at our stations, and it appeared that since 60s till almost present, there has been some shift to earlier arrivals of young spotted flycatchers, but it was only a slight shift. But generally, the results were dominated by those huge year-to-year changes in the timing of migration of spotted flycatchers at Bukovo. So we wanted to check what could be the environmental conditions responsible for those huge year-to-year changes. And so we analyzed again a set of temperatures across Europe. Firstly, temperatures at many weather stations across Scandinavia during the summer breeding seasons of spotted flycatchers, which is June and July. And it appeared that there was clear relation between June temperatures in Scandinavia and the timing of autumn migration of young spotted flycatchers at Bukovo. So basically, the warmer was summer at the breeding grounds, especially in those two groups of stations in Norway and also those three stations here in Skane. The warmer was summer in those areas in Scandinavia, the earlier young spotted flycatchers migrated in autumn through Bukovo. this is rather easy to explain, because if those young birds experienced warm and dry summer, then probably they had good conditions to develop quickly and get mature early, and they were ready early to depart from their breeding grounds, so that we saw them quite early here at the Polish coast on migration. But again, we tried to check whether any spring temperatures that could act on adult spotted flycatchers contributed to that pattern. And yes, it appeared that actually temperatures during spring migration on migration routes of black caps here at Apennine Peninsula and also at the Balkans, then further on the way from the Balkans, but also at Lugano at the foothills of Alps, had effect on what happened or what we observed half a year later during autumn migration at our stations. So then again, those temperatures here in April and May could have affected only the adult birds that were heading north, while those immatures that we study half a year later had not even exist at that point. So again, this would indicate some domino effect on the shifts in the adult life cycle that are then reflected in the timing of the offspring life. So to sum that up and to link with the spring migration timing that I presented last week, why is that possible that some climatic conditions far away from the Baltic coast and months earlier, like half a year earlier, at the non-breeding grounds and non-migration routes could shape or could influence the timing of autumn migration of birds that we observe at the Operation Baltic's field stations. So first, that effect on the spring migration might have its source already in the non-breeding grounds. So if there is wet summer in the south in Africa, then there would be a viable food abundance, especially for insectivores, which would then enable those long distance migrants for early departure, and they would be departing in good conditions. That would then allow them to cross the migration distance relatively fast and with few stopovers. If on top of that they encounter good conditions on the spring stopovers close to the breeding grounds, then again the whole migration speeds up. That way we would observe early spring migration of those adult birds heading for the breeding grounds at our part of the Baltic coast. And then what happens next? What's the follow-up? If those birds migrate through the Baltic coast early, then they also reach their breeding grounds early. And then if they encounter warm and dry summer at the breeding grounds, they can start their breeding attempts early. They can go for early nesting, early laying eggs. So then the youngs will hatch also relatively early. Then if on top of that, the warm and dry summer carries on, then the young birds will have plenty of food and good conditions to develop. So this will bring then early maturity of young birds and the early readiness to depart for migration, to depart from their breeding grounds. And then they would show up early at our stations, which will be ones of their first stopovers on the autumn migration route to the south. And then, because those youngs were mature early, they will also end their migration early. Hence, that shift to early end of migration of those latest migrants. If those youngs are mature, there is no point of them to stay at the breeding grounds because they've got long distance to cross. The earlier they depart, the better for them, the more time they've got to safely make it to the non-breeding grounds. But we should bear in mind that what I say here reflects only to those long distance migrants that manage to have only one brood per year, because in a shorter distance migrants that would fit in 2 or even 3 broods in a long spring and summer season, this looks differently. Then basically, then the end of migration of young birds can extend, because then later during the season we would have the birds from 2nd or 3rd broods as we observe, for example, in song thrushes or robins, which are medium distance migrants. So to summarize that part, basically migratory birds are organisms with such tight annual schedules that any shift in one life stage causes that carryover effect, and the carryover effect, the shift in the life stage of one generation, the adults heading for the breeding grounds, can cause the domino effect that will manifest in their offspring, and we'll observe it as some changes in the timing of young birds' migration. And then to sum up the two parts of the talk about the Operation Baltic, a question that needs to be answered, like, is Operation Baltic still valuable? And this is a question that I really face, and especially I've been facing 8 years ago when I started chairing Operation Baltic. Many people were asking me, is it still worth all that effort and all that fundraising to still carry on your monitoring? I mean, after 6 years, you certainly know everything about the migrants. So why should you carry on that research? So my answer is that we should definitely carry on Operation Baltic. And this is why. Basically, we see, and now summarizing those results of the 6 years, we really see that bird migrations are not stable. Maybe in the past, centuries ago, there have been indications of the change of seasons, and those first barn swallows were considered a sign of spring. But recently, we see those changes in bird migration timing because they adjust to the changes in their environments. Maybe a few hundred years ago, those changes in the environment were slow, but as we know, recent decades, the changes in the environments have speeded up in the effect of our human disturbance and climate change. So those changes in birds migration will go even faster. And these changes might be small each year and invisible, inconspicuous, but they do accumulate over long periods. And as I showed, some changes will only be visible in a period like 50 or 60 years when they accumulate to a shift in migration timing up to 2 weeks, which is quite considerable in that tight schedule of a migrant. And the knowledge of those changes for different species of migrants and the reasons of those changes, as well as consequences, will enable us for their efficient conservation. There is no other way to protect the migrants. And also the knowledge we've accumulated over the 60 years will remain available for future researchers and observers of bird migrations. And this is important because for example, now in 2021, species as robins or blackcap or willow warblers might seem migrants. But because their migration changed, maybe in another 60 or 120 years, nobody would have believed us that those birds even migrated if there wasn't the 60 years of our data. And this is quite likely scenario in such species as robin or blackcap, in which over the last half a century we observe shortening of their migration distance and the higher proportion of population becoming sedentary. So maybe in another 60 years robin will be completely sedentary birds, and nobody wouldn't believe us that they once migrated if there wasn't my PhD analysis of the ringing recoveries and some other data. So because Operation Baltic has been collecting scientific data for 60 years, it is worthwhile to carry on with the same monitoring methods for other decades to document those changes, because bird migrations will change. And because we set up those monitoring, the standardized methods, it will be just so easy to repeat it in the following years, maybe supplementing with some other methods. But then we've got the data which is comparable over 60 years, and carry on with the same manner would make another 60 years or 120 years fully comparable with those collected in the past. So my answer to that question, whether it's still worthwhile to carry on Operation Baltic, is yes, it is, because this is the data that will remain for the future generations to analyze and to document the migrations of birds as we observe it now, and as they have been 60 years ago. So at that point, it's a good occasion to say thank you to those that made all those 60 years of Operation Baltic possible, and especially to the first team of founders of Operation Baltic and Professor Przemysław Busse, my supervisor of my PhD and my mentor for many years, who has been for many years the leaders of Operation Baltic, but who is retired now. Now, all the subsequent organizing teams and hundreds of volunteers who every year come to Operation Baltic Station and help to run that monitoring project are the core of our activity, and it wouldn't be possible without them. And also over the years, many institutions and individuals have supported Operation Baltic financially, logistically, and in many other ways. And among those, special thanks should go to the Operation Baltic Foundation, which is now 5 years old and which support our activities considerably. And then its thanks should go to everyone who has helped Operation Baltic in any way for all those 60 years. So let's continue to study bird migrations at Operation Baltic stations or elsewhere. And I hope we can meet at the Operation Baltic's field stations during the next decades, and especially when we get out of that COVID situations and travels will be possible. You are always welcome at our stations. We are at the same locations every spring and summer, so it's quite easy to find us out. And if you wanted to get more information and follow our efforts, then this is our websites and Facebooks when we publish all the current information about our activities. Well, thank you for your attention.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Magda. That was brilliant. Wow, it's fascinating to see how these complex interactions between migration movements and your climate and habitat are starting to be unraveled in your monitoring work. So thank you for sharing with us. I haven't seen any questions coming through in the chat yet. There was a comment from David Thompson just affirming what you already said, that these sorts of studies, these studies are becoming more and more valuable the longer that they run.
Well, I'm glad everyone is convinced.
Yeah. Well, that contact information that you shared, I think maybe Tessa will share that in the email when she sends out the video links as well. So if anyone thinks of questions later on.
Yeah, I'll be happy to answer. And please follow us on Facebook. Every couple of days there is fresh story from the station. So you'll see what migrants do arrive at the Operation Baltic in the consecutive weeks.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you so much, Magda.
Well, thank you.
One question from David that just came.
Okay.
Yeah. So are there data on timing of breeding for this species?
Yes, there is data on timing of breeding. I mean, our team doesn't collect this type of data because basically when the breeding starts that we go home to rest. But fortunately, there are other researchers team who are out in the breeding season. So there is excellent long-term breeding data from Eastern Poland, from Białowieża National Park, from the team from Wrocław University, and this data is available for whoever asks that data. And then I know that the Scandinavian colleagues have also collected data on breeding of those birds over many years, and there are also breeding atlases. So it would be possible to link the migration data to the breeding data, like asking the other teams for the exchange. And this is what we do in some of our papers.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. It was great to see you.